welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Shelley Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. Today, we are excited to welcome Cynthia Minden to the show. In 2002, two donkeys hopped off the back of a truck and into Cynthia and her partner's newly fenced paddock. Bought sight unseen by a neighbor, these newcomers joined their small farm on Denman Island, British Columbia. This was the beginning of Cynthia's wonderful connection to donkeys. It was a steep learning curve as Cynthia learned about behavior and health challenges. Cynthia reached out to a donkey club for advice with training and care. The advice offered included punishment, flooding, and dominance techniques that were not within Cynthia's nature to practice. Thankfully, Cynthia also attended a short demonstration on clicker training donkeys. That was exceptional, and Cynthia never looked back. Since then, Cynthia has studied with Alexandra Kurland, Monty Gwen, Peggy Hogan, Ben Hart, and Ken Ramirez, and attended numerous clicker expos and the donkey welfare symposiums through UC Davis, California. Cynthia is a visual artist and also a certified learning professional in equine facilitated wellness. Cynthia authored a blog for a while and continues to study and learn everything she can about donkeys. Positive reinforcement training is absolutely the best way to teach, build, trust, and form exquisite relationships with these big-hearted equines. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you so much, Shelley.
You're welcome. I'm super excited to have you here today. And all the more so with all the tech challenges you've just walked through with me. So thank you for being patient with those.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And it's a pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be talking to you today. Thank you.
Well, it's a privilege to be talking to you today. And I'm really excited. I don't think we've had anybody on the show thus far that's primary training focus or primary animal that they work with has been donkeys. So that's going to be really exciting for me to learn from you in that way. It would be great if you could get us started off by telling us a little bit about your story and how you started working with animals and how you got involved with donkeys in particular and how you spend your days now.
Well, I rode horses as a kid, not seriously, but certainly often. And then even in college, I went to college in California where you could take riding as a PE elective. And so I did that. And I have to say that I learned more about taking care of the saddle than I did the horse. And, so really, it wasn't at all, the focus wasn't at all about establishing any kind of relationship with the horse. That said, I really am a big city kid. I grew up in Toronto. I've lived in Europe and in California and in Quebec, but as a classical musician, I really needed to be anchored in a big city, and Toronto, since I'm a Canadian, was the best place at the time that I was a serious flute student. But I always had dreams of living in the country and dreams of having a small farm and living with animals. And so long story short, in 1987, I decided to move to one of the Gulf Islands, not this one, but Southern Gulf Island in British Columbia. And I didn't have animals then because I just lived sort of in a small cottage perched on a bluff. But then my partner, Graham, and I moved to Denman Island knowing that we wanted to have animals and garden and fruit trees and chickens. And so we came here in 1990. And donkeys were not really in my horizon at all. We were aiming to have either sheep or goats. But then, as you read in the introduction, a neighbor put this idea of donkeys kind of into my mind. And I really love camping and hiking. Haven't done it recently, but back in the day was doing a lot of that. But it was mostly car camping. And I got really sick of car camping because, the sites are so close to everyone else, and then people bring, it's like being neighbors with a whole bunch of people without the walls, so people bring their radios and all their gear and stuff in it. And so I really wanted to go trekking, and we went on a trek in the Similkameen Valley where we passed some horses, pack horses. And this light bulb went on where I thought, hey, I could have an animal that could carry my gear. But I'd never really imagined owning a horse. So then when my neighbor put this idea of donkeys, and as you mentioned, we had this newly fenced little paddock and a 2-stall run-in shed. And so he went out and bought a donkey, sight unseen, and then another donkey from an auction. And as you mentioned, again, they arrived, and we're going to be living in our new little paddock. And that was really the beginning. And donkeys, I think when you have an animal that has any kind of specific challenges, it really throws you into the deep end in a hurry. You need to figure out what's going on. And so the little donkey that my neighbor had bought was physically challenged and had been raised as an orphan. And so he had a lot of behavior problems as well. He was not socialized by other donkeys. He thought he was a person. And it was like, oh my goodness. And then my neighbor decided he didn't really want the donkey. And so these donkeys ended up with us. And it's been a journey. It's really been a journey. There was a lot of paddling around in the deep end for quite a while with different, things that went on. But through it all, I realized that I am smitten by donkeys. These animals have really captured my heart to the point where I've even mused about whether, donkeys featured prominently in a past life or something. Like, why? My mother used to say, why donkeys? And I never really had a good answer. But they're a joy to live with. They're a joy to train. And it's really put me on a path of learning as much as I can about the differences between donkeys and horses. Very different animals, and yet, both are equine. And I think there are a lot of horse owners that may also have, 1 or 2 donkeys, and some veterinarians will treat donkeys as small horses with big ears. And really that's not the case. They are their own unique species with their own very different ethology than horses. Their digestive systems are very different than horses. You can't feed them the same way, and they process information differently as well. And, historically, donkeys figure into history for thousands of years. going back to biblical times. And as long as there has been any kind of, visual or oral history of peoples living in different places around the world, donkeys have been part of that story. And still today, donkeys are valued in many countries around the world as working animals. And it's amazing in a way to me that they have forgiven us humans for some of the treatment that they have received over time in various places around the world, because there are many myths which I love to debunk, I guess is the right word, about donkeys being stubborn and stupid. And, we certainly knew years ago that science didn't even believe that animals had feelings or that could feel pain. We've come a long way. And in part, I think positive reinforcement and the embrace of that way of working with animals has really, really been pivotal in us learning so much about how animals, how they learn, how they process information, and that they are sentient beings and experience, a myriad of emotions.
It's clear how much you love donkeys listening to you talk about them. And I was going to ask you, what is it about donkeys that you're smitten by? But then you went on to say that your mom always said, why donkeys? And you can never come up with the specific answer for it. So you're not sure exactly what it is about them that you're smitten by?
I think there's probably a lot of answers to that question. But if you look into a donkey's eyes, there's a real depth of feeling, and probably even, carrying some genetic history there as well. They're also like funny and sociable and very communicative and very different one from the other as well. I have 4 donkeys, and each one has a very unique personality. And by the way, I've never heard a donkey say hee-haw, which is kind of amusing that they all have, quite a different sound to their bray. I have a donkey that we like to say that she sings opera, because she doesn't really bray. She has this more of like a clear, almost bell-like singing voice. So yeah, there's lots of reasons, I think, that I'm smitten by donkeys. But
you also mentioned that you like to take opportunities to bust myths around donkeys and things like, people often say things like they're stubborn or they're stupid. And I think those were a couple of the things that you said that people will sometimes say. I wondered if you maybe wanted to kind of pick one of those apart right now and bust one of those myths for us. Like, what is it, do you think, why is it, do you think people call donkeys stubborn? Where does that myth come from? And why is it not correct?
That's a great question. Donkeys are very cautious animals, and they're very thoughtful animals, and they will not knowingly put themselves in harm's way. Also, their nervous system response to danger, or even what they might perceive as potential danger, is more to freeze and then possibly to fight, but not so much flight. Not to say that they can't spook, of course they can. But here's an example. I could be walking down the street, the same street that I live on, and walk down with a donkey almost every day. And maybe somebody has put a garbage can out that wasn't there the last time we walked down that very same road, which they know well. The donkey will tend to stop and assess the situation. So now we've got a donkey that is basically planted, on the road and refuses to move until he or she has decided, what is that shape? Is it coming toward me? can I smell anything? Can I hear anything? So it's engaging all of its senses to determine whether that garbage can is a threat. These are prey animals, so they're very attuned to their surroundings. Same thing with I've often been out walking and a donkey will stop, and I have no idea why. There is nothing. I can't see anything in the immediate surroundings that would But I always give the donkey time because I know that they have a reason. And we might stand there for quite a while when, out of the blue, someone on a bicycle will come zooming down the road. And that donkey, those big ears, well, they've heard that bicycle coming from way far away, and I've heard nothing. But, if you're in a hurry and you are really focused on your own agenda, you're going to be upset with that donkey for stopping and refusing to move. So what's going on? And so, that's one of the reasons that they're called stubborn, but I just call it donkey time. They can really teach you a lot about yourself. All animals can, of course, but I think because of that reflective, cautious nature, that we're not always kind of on the same page, or we're not perceiving the same threats or the same potential things that they are. They can really kind of, you want to get them going, but through positive reinforcement and through understanding that choice is also reinforcing, which is something I learned later on, I think, in working with them. Now I give them choice, and I give and I let them take the time they need, and I consider my relationship with them to be a partnership, not a hierarchical thing where it's we're doing this and you're doing it too, kind of thing. And I think that's really the beauty of clicker training. Being able to, we talk about developing relationship, but what does that really mean? I think it really means that me, human, and them, animal, there is not, except in an emergency situation, there shouldn't really be a hierarchy. It's not that I'm not better than them. Like, we're just two, there's just two of us, and we're going to engage in whatever, we're going to engage in. So I used to head out for a walk, and sometimes the donkey just didn't feel like going. And I think in the early days, I would say, come on, we're going. This is what we're doing now. Let's make it work for you. And, I may try that. I don't necessarily give up right away. But there's been many times where I've just said, oh, okay, you don't feel like going? Let's go home, right? Because that's the nonverbal communication that I've learned to really try to tease apart.
Thank you for unpacking that myth a little bit for us. And I know I've definitely heard people refer to donkeys as stubborn before. And as somebody who works with dogs, I frequently hear people refer to dogs in that same way. And as you were talking, it hit me when you said, if you're focused on your own agenda. And I think that's when we often use these labels like, oh, you're being stubborn, or you're being spiteful, or you're being, this or that, is when we're focused on what we're wanting to get out of the situation. And the animal maybe isn't doing that, rather than stepping back and recognizing that they've got a whole world of perception going on that has to do with all kinds of things besides us and our agenda. So that was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you tell us a little bit about some of the, what do you do with donkeys? Do you work with people as a consultant? Are you doing things with the donkeys on your property? What kinds of work are you doing with donkeys today?
Well, I'm a visual artist, and so my passion for art making And I work in sculptural form and mixed media, and I sometimes teach art as well. And so my passion for art making was kind of in my right hand, and my passion for donkeys was in my left hand. And I could never really imagine how I could, they seemed like two very distinct worlds in a way. And then a number of years ago, I fell down this rabbit hole and into the training that is called equine facilitated wellness. And it was about a 4-year journey that was very intense training through the Professional Association of Equine Facilitated Wellness Canada. And that includes donkeys, horses, and mules, although it's, I would say, very horse focused. But it was just a wonderful journey. And I also thought a very good fit with positive reinforcement training, because a lot of the core values are shared. And a lot of the work in equine facilitated wellness is about recognizing the animal as a sentient being. It's about nonverbal communication. It's about observation and pausing and allowing, working slowly and incrementally. And the wellness part of that title refers to human wellness. So really the work can help us humans to integrate our own, maybe integrate isn't the right word, maybe expand the capacity of our senses. So whereas equine, other animals too, of course, are very present and oriented, their senses are being fully utilized all the time, especially prey animals like equine. Us humans, we often live in our heads and we worry about the future and we dwell in the past. And I, even with all my training, I can slip into that really, really easily. But when we work in partnership with equine, we're really exploring a relationship, which is, I think, the same as what we're doing in positive reinforcement training. And they have the uncanny ability to help us focus and to help us reflect. They our autonomic nervous systems can actually co-regulate with an equine, and they can help us to breathe and to soften. And they can really allow us to come away with less stress and maybe a deeper empathy and connection for yourself, to yourself, and to other people as well. So now I am a learning professional, a certified learning professional in equine facilitated wellness. And what that means is that I take what I am professional in my case, it's art and formerly music. And then I can fold that into a practice with the donkeys. And there's also a very strong nature-based component in this work too. So that's what I'm doing now under my new little company, well, new as of a couple of years ago. And I love it. I just love it. And so it's a real blending of these two passions, which, formerly seemed like separate worlds.
What is the name of that company?
It's Cynthia Minden Arts and Equine.ca is what it is. Yeah. And so I work with individuals and I work with small groups, and people come and they spend experiential time, I guess is the best way to describe it, with the donkeys. And we can do all kinds of things with them too, but it's not about cued behavior. And it was an interesting transition for the donkeys when I first got started, because they were expecting to be reinforced for, a variety of things that they might engage in. But I'm not asking them for any cued behaviors at all. And so the reinforcement would only be coming in the form of physical contact, scratches and ear rubs and butt rubs and things like that, but not in the form of food. So, although lately I have started kind of just bringing in a little bit of clicker training into the work with clients just to kind of show them how engaged the donkeys become when they see that visual cue of my treat pouch, which is huge. But mostly, so depending on people's comfort, we can even work on the other side of a fence if people aren't comfortable coming in. And so we'll do some grounding, and we'll do some body scan and try to locate, whether there's any people are feeling any anxiety. And if so, I can help them try to refocus. But so far, everybody's wanted to come in. And then I'm finding that there's always one at least, but possibly more donkeys that will actually volunteer to engage with us. So we're working at Liberty, and, the donkeys will pick me today and, saunter over. I'm finding my two older donkeys just love this work. They just love the quiet, hands-on. We can do a lot of grounding exercises with them. And then some of the work that I'm doing with the donkeys, I'll also take people over to a tree and have them practice, that same grounding work with a tree, because I don't want people to go home and think, well, that was fun, but I don't have a donkey, so I can't do that. So the donkeys will match our breathing. And sometimes we do leading. We work sometimes with some acupressure points, the bladder meridian along the top line of the donkey. We even do air grooming sometimes, and people can feel heat emanating sometimes from different places in the donkey's body. Donkeys are free to walk away at any time they want to, but we do sometimes do leading. And, I love to teach a little bit of Alexandra Kurland's, what I learned from her about using very soft hands with the lead rope. So then back in my studio, we might make rope out of daffodil leaves, where we're plying together long leaves, and we might make it long enough that we can use that as a lead rope when we come back to the donkeys. And so there's that physical connection, but it's nothing that you can use any kind of, strength or pulling or forcefulness with. It's just that ephemeral, oh, look, I've made a rope out of daffodil leaves, but just to have that approximation next to the donkey, where you're then inviting the donkey to walk alongside of you. So there's a lot, and then we do printmaking and drawing and folded books and nature-based weaving and all kinds of things. It's really fun.
It sounds really fun and really pretty unique. I haven't heard of anybody else. Guessing there may be other people doing something similar, but I certainly don't know of a lot of folks doing things like this with donkeys. So really interesting. And I get just such a visual in my head of people leading the donkeys with the daffodil braids. That's really, really a nice thought to think of, having such a delicate thing on the donkey that they're leading them by, that, as you said, you couldn't use it to apply any kind of power over or anything like that. So very cool. Right. How long have you been doing this equine facilitated wellness work now?
I started the training in 2018, I believe, and it was a very intensive course where I needed many hours of practicum work. So I learned a lot through my practicum sessions with people. And then I became certified in 2021 was, when I, was finally able to hang up my shingle and have all of the paperwork in order to. And I think another shared value between that and positive reinforcement is that we have the donkey's back in whatever we're doing, which is a lovely way to think about how we are protectors, because they're living with us, where we have a big responsibility toward them. And in both clicker training and the EFW work, it's really behooves us to make sure that the animals are physically and emotionally well. So you would never work with an animal that wasn't, and you wouldn't work with just any animal. So if I had, say, a donkey that I had newly rescued, for example, that was bringing a lot of past trauma or emotional distress with him or her, that animal would not be ready to engage in work with clients. So, I think, and I think I first learned that in clicker training. You can teach an animal anything that it is physically and emotionally capable of learning, but should you? All right. So you make that assessment first, like, is this good for the animal at this time?
Thank you for sharing all of that with us so far. It's really, really fun and interesting to learn about all of the work that you're doing with donkeys. I wonder if you could share with us now about a training related challenge that you've experienced, and maybe kind of talk us through how you worked through that challenge and some things you learned through the process.
Well, there's one training related challenge that I actually haven't solved. So I would love any kind of feedback. But one of my donkeys, her name is Sheog, which means young fairy in Gaelic. She's 16 years old now, and I've had her since she was 3. And I love working with her. She loves clicker training. She just eats it up. But she's quite an anxious little soul. And so I was grateful that I eventually learned, that I'm also training for attitude and not just for behavior, which I don't think I understood when I first started. So I've really worked on that with her. But one of the challenges I have with her is I take her out for hikes and walks, and she's great and she loves it. And we bushwhack and we go up, the sides of ridges and through deep shrubbery, and she's keen and it's wonderful. But she doesn't want to come home. And so, which is curious, the rest of her herd is at home. And so we've practiced, I've kind of tried to dissect it as one does as a clicker trainer, like, what's the hesitation? But as we get closer to home, she will start to stall and refuse to move. And she'll drop her nose, like a head down kind of thing, down to the ground. And then I have, a couple of ways that I can refocus her. And I've put mats on the road. She's great at stationing. She's great at auto stationing. And I can walk her sometimes on the road without actually any halter and lead rope at all. And she's learned to stay with me. So that's all good. But we get to the gate and she often just won't go through. So I've practiced just going back and forth through the gate with her. I put her on a higher rate of reinforcement. I've brought her home and thought perhaps she doesn't want to come back in because she thinks that our time together is going to be over. So I've brought her home, where I've tried to set up my environment for success and put the other donkeys in a different paddock where she, they can see her, etc. And then taken her halter and lead rope off and played with her and done a whole other, session of things that she can do and she's really good at. And so that the session wouldn't be over when she comes home. So that, coming home wouldn't mean the end. And so some days all of that works, and other days it still doesn't work. And so I'm still struggling with that one, I have to say. I have not solved it. She's, and I love that she challenges me that way, but I also, don't love that I haven't been able to really, figure it out. I haven't been able to quite totally figure it out because it still happens.
That's tough. And it's an interesting challenge, but also tough when you have something like that you're just kind of not able to completely figure out. You mentioned a couple of them, but do you have some other hypotheses about why she might be doing this? We've thought alone time with you might be the culprit. Were you thinking maybe going through the gate itself might be the culprit? Is that why you were thinking in and out of the gate?
Yes, and we tried different gates. So there's a number of ways we can get back into the property. So, I've tried different gates. I've given her the option, if she gets really stuck at one gate, I don't. After a while, I decide, okay, we're not going to push it. Let's just walk around a little more and try a different gate. And I mean, eventually she comes home, right? Because, we're not still out there on the road. But so eventually it works, but it's not smooth. It's not a clean loop, I think, as Alexander Kurland has taught me. There's too many unwanted behaviors, between walking and getting back in the paddock.
Not a clean loop yet.
Yes. Right.
All right. Well, I'll be interested to hear what you learn from that challenge and how you are able to figure it out, because I'm confident that you will be. Do you have other donkey people in your life that you rely on for help when you are in learning challenges, or that you learn from? Or do you primarily find yourself learning from horse people and other animal trainers?
Well, certainly Ken Ramirez, when I spent 5 days down at the ranch, surrounded by all of his lovely donkeys. That was such a treat and such a pleasure. I would love to have some one-on-one training time with him, but given his busy schedule, I don't think that's a possibility. I think it's mostly been my training. Has been mostly working with horse owners, although some of those trainers also have had some experience with donkeys or mules. But they do process information differently, and then you get a unique personality like Shiog. My other donkeys have no trouble with going out for a hike and coming home. Like, that's just not an issue. So it's sort of unique to her.
So, although you haven't solved this particular training challenge yet, I wonder, are there certain things that you have learned about yourself, about Shiog? I'm not sure if I said her name right.
Yeah, that's right.
Or just kind of in general, have you learned some things as you've worked through this challenge with her?
Oh, I've learned a lot of things. I think I would have said I was an exceptionally patient person before I started working with Shiog. And so now, I have to take a deep breath, or maybe a few, go and have that proverbial cup of tea and think about things, shaping plans. I'm really glad that I learned about that. And I think I neglected to mention in my bio that I also did a course on operant conditioning behavior analysis through Dalhousie University. And that was years ago, and I forgot about it. And yet I really learned a lot in that course about setting the environment for success and writing shaping plans. So shaping plans was like a requirement of that course. Every week we had to submit video footage with a shaping plan. And, I think I'm speaking for more than just myself, but I think many of us get lazy about actually, writing a shaping plan and kind of just, make it up as we go. And I know I get lazy about videoing myself as often as I should, but whenever I do, oh golly, I learn so much watching the playback. So yeah, it's an ongoing process. I will be a lifelong learner.
I think we all will be. So I can relate to that for sure. Well, thank you for sharing that story with us and that training challenge with us. And I hope that you will continue to share in the ATA community with us as you work through that. Would love to see some video of Shiog in the community if you felt like it. But for now, I would like to hear about a training situation that you are proud of and or that you have found reinforcing.
I would have to say liberty work. I've work a lot with having the donkeys stay with me at liberty and read my body language. So so we'll walk through trees, for example, and we'll weave our way perhaps through openings in trees. And then at a certain place, I might give them a cue for single file, for follow me. And then I'll maybe give them a cue to walk beside me, and then maybe to stop, and then maybe to trot. And all of that work is at liberty. And it's a lot of fun. And they're all really good at it. I'm sure there are holes here and there, but generally we just really do it for fun. And, even if I suddenly make a right turn or a left turn, they're pretty good at anticipating that and staying with me. Or I can point and send a donkey between a couple of trees or over to a mat station. I think I worked on that so much that the donkeys for a while were kind of glued to my hip, and then sending them away from me became a real challenge. but thanks to Peggy and Monty, I learned about auto stationing, and so now they're much better at leaving my side. But the liberty work is a lot of fun.
So could you share a little bit about how auto stationing works?
Well, it's basically working with stationing. So, using a mat on the ground, and then getting the donkey really solid about staying on that station until you give a release cue. And then working, it's really fun and challenging to work with multiple animals. So you get each donkey very solid at standing on a mat one at a time. And then you have one and you'll introduce a second one. And then you really have to up your rate of reinforcement at that point. So you might and then it's fun to have one stand while you ask the other one to walk around. But the other one has to stand. So you have to kind of do these flyby reinforcements to the one that's standing, as well as feeding the one that's walking. So that's a lot of fun. But then sending them. So once they've learned, because everything you teach, you have to teach the opposite, right? So you're going to teach them to stand still. If you work on that without teaching them to move forward or backwards, you're never going to get them to move forwards or backwards. So you have to work on that as well. And then when stationing becomes such a solid behavior, and they know that good things happen there, the good things happen when they're standing on that mat, then you can send them to a mat. And so auto stationing, I don't know whether Peggy Hogan came up with that term or not, but I learned it from her, is when, they've got that behavior down pretty solidly. And then when they see a mat, they will automatically go and stand there.
Very cool. And so for your own donkeys, when you have 4, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
'Cause so, and you're sometimes working with all 4 of them in this way with some on stations and some working. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm curious, when you're working with them on stations, are they stationed in a specific order from one another on specific stations or something different? Does that make sense? Like, do they have go ahead if it makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, no, the order's always different. And I have a pedestal, 1 or 2 pedestals. So that could be like a piece of plywood that's bolted to a tire. And that can be a station. And I've got another little pallet that has plywood on top that can be a station. And then I've got different mats on the ground too. So they can choose. But I have found for where I'm at as a trainer, and I have a long way to go, but right now they need to be close enough to me, or I need to be close enough to them that I can keep reinforcing them for staying put. I don't know if you ever have a chance to watch, I think there's some video of Anat Shalev in Israel doing stationing with her 5 horses. It is so beautiful. And they're not all close together, but they are rock solid in wherever she puts them. And then she goes, over to that. I'm not at that level yet, but I aspire to that. So right now they can choose a station for themselves. And then I have to be still putting them on a pretty high rate of reinforcement.
Thank you. That makes sense. And I'll have to look up that video with Anat. She is a lovely trainer. I have not seen what you're talking about there, but she's wonderful and definitely on my mind recently. She's been on the show before too. So
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. That sounds like a lot of fun working with your donkeys at Liberty in the way that you described. I can see why that would be very reinforcing. Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing everything that you have shared with us so far. Before we start wrapping up here in just a couple minutes, though, I did want to give you a chance if there's anything you wanted to share about your donkeys or the equine facilitated wellness work you do, or anything that I have not yet asked about that you would like to take this opportunity to share about. You're welcome to do so.
Oh, thank you, Shelley. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I just I feel very privileged to have had the opportunity to learn about both of these modalities. If that's the correct term, but clicker training and equine facilitated wellness. I found too recently, I have a donkey with some dental pain or mouth pain that's going on right now too. And it's been so interesting working with her. She's so communicative. And in the last couple of days, she has really started up a different kind of conversation with me, which is really interesting. For example, I have to separate her because she's getting a different kind of feed, wet mashes and some chopped up hay is what she can manage right now. And so she will ask to come out of her stall. And had I not been paying attention, I think I would have thought, well, she's done. That's all she's going to eat. But since I've been hanging around so much, I realized, no, she's just coming out because she doesn't want to pee in her stall and she would rather pee over there. And then she's going to come back to her stall, and she does. Or I warm up their water at this time of year to make sure that they're still drinking enough in this transition into colder weather. So maybe she's wanting to check out the other water buckets because the one in her stall is maybe too cool. And then she's going to come back to her stall. So I just think taking the time, building that staircase that we often talk about as clicker trainers, we talk about it in terms of successive approximations. But if we can also think about it in terms of building relationship and in terms of nonverbal communication, what are they trying to say? And then working with individual animals enough so that they're not always in a herd setting. And, you've got these 4, it's a small herd, but nonetheless, but allowing each one to have that time with you. It can be a very different experience from one animal to another that I really appreciate. And I really appreciate being able to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you talking with all of us today. I've really enjoyed it, and I know that the listeners are going to as well. Before we wrap up, we will put this all in the show notes too, but before we wrap up here, could you share with everybody where they can find you online, how they can get in touch, all of those kinds of things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the most current place to direct people would be to my website, which I have one for equine facilitated wellness, which is Cynthia Minden Arts and equine.ca. And then I have my art website, which is just cynthiaminden.com. I also have a YouTube channel, but I really don't keep it current. So I don't think I'm even going to point you in that direction. And then I still have a donkey blog, but I don't keep that current either. I just don't have the time to be, online that as much, anymore. So it's still there as kind of an archive. And every once in a while, I still get a question from a donkey owner about, what to feed or what to do. It's sort of like a Dear Ann Landers kind of thing, I think, in a way. But I don't keep it current, but I just keep it up there as a kind of diary.
Well, thank you. We will link to your website and all of those places in the show notes. So
thank you so much.
You're welcome. And Cynthia, from myself, for all of the listeners, from the ATA community, thank you so much for taking the time today to be with us and share just a little bit about the wonderful work that you are doing in the world. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's really been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.